The hum of the server farm in my basement was my lullaby. It was the sound of security, of a world I had built from scratch, brick by digital brick. My penthouse apartment overlooked the glittering sprawl of the city, a constellation of lights that I had once stared at from park benches, my stomach aching with a hunger that was about more than just food. At 28, my company, Nexus Forge, was a titan in the data security industry. I was the boy genius who had crawled out of the gutter and built an empire. It was a narrative the media loved, a clean, inspiring story. They always left out the dirty parts. The dirty part had a name, Sarah. My mother. The doorman buzzed me, his voice a polite crackle through the intercom. "Mr. Kane, there's a Sarah here to see you. She says she's your mother." Ice, sharp and sudden, flooded my veins. For 12 years, that name had been a phantom, a ghost I had locked away in the deepest, darkest vault of my memory. I hadn't seen or heard from her since the night she'd stood on the porch of our cramped rental, a single, battered suitcase at my feet. I was 16. "You're a man now, Alex," she had said, her voice devoid of emotion. Rain had slicked her hair to her forehead, but she didn't seem to notice. "Mark and we need to focus on the new baby. On our family. You're smart. You'll figure it out." She hadn't been yelling. That was the worst part. It was a calm, rational dismissal, as if I were a line item on a budget that needed to be cut. Mark, her new husband of less than a year, had stood behind her in the doorway, his silhouette a bulky, silent endorsement of her words. A new baby was on the way, and I, the relic of her first, failed marriage, was excess baggage. "Send her up," I said to the doorman, my own voice a stranger to my ears, flat, cold, metallic. The hum of the servers seemed to grow louder, a swarm of angry hornets in my chest. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, my reflection a stark figure against the city lights. The tailored suit, the confident posture, it was all armor. Armor I had forged in the fires of abandonment. I had slept in shelters. I had washed dishes until my hands were raw. I had taught myself to code from library books, fueled by black coffee and a burning, all-consuming need to prove her wrong. To prove that I didn't need her. That I could not only survive, but thrive in a world that she had thrown me into. The elevator chimed, a soft, melodic sound that signaled the arrival of my past. I turned as the door to my apartment opened. She was older, of course. The lines around her eyes were deeper, etched by time and, I hoped, some small measure of regret. Her hair, once a vibrant blonde, was now a faded, weary version of its former self. She was holding her handbag with both hands, a nervous gesture I didn't recognize. She looked small and out of place in the cavernous, minimalist space of my living room. "Alex," she breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the polished concrete floors, the expensive art, the view. "Sarah," I replied, keeping my tone level. I did not call her mom. She had forfeited that right 12 years ago on a rainy porch. "You've done well for yourself," she said, a hint of awe in her voice. "I figured it out," I said, throwing her own words back at her. A flicker of something, shame, perhaps, crossed her face before it was replaced by a look of strained determination. "I know this is sudden," she began, taking a tentative step forward. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." I remained silent, a statue carved from ice. I would give her nothing. No warmth, no encouragement. She faltered, then took a deep breath. "It's about Liam and Chloe." The names meant nothing to me. They were the abstract concepts for which I had been discarded. The new family. They're wonderful kids, Alex. So smart. Chloe, she wants to be a doctor. She has the grades for it, a real gift. And Liam, he's an artist, so talented. They've both been accepted to university. Good ones. She paused, waiting for a reaction. I gave her none. My heart was a block of granite in my chest. "The thing is," she continued, her voice dropping, "things have been difficult. Mark's job at the plant, it's gone. His health isn't what it used to be. We just don't have the money for their tuition. Not even close. And there it was. The reason for her pilgrimage. Not remorse. Not a desire to reconnect. It was a transaction. Her eyes finally met mine, and they were filled with a desperate, audacious plea. I know it's a lot to ask. But you have so much. For you, this would be nothing. It would be everything for them. It's your duty, Alex. They're your brother and sister. The word duty detonated in the quiet room. Duty? Where was her duty when her 16-year-old son was trying to find a dry place to sleep? Where was her duty when I was eating expired food from a dumpster behind a grocery store? The rage I had kept compressed for over a decade began to expand, hot and violent. The hum of the servers was a roar now, the sound of my carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. I took a slow, deliberate step towards her. For the first time, she looked afraid of me. Good. My duty? I whispered, the sound more menacing than a shout. Let me tell you about my duty. My duty was to myself. To not die on the street you threw me on. To not let the world you abandoned me to crush me. I have no duty to you, or to them. They're innocent children, she cried, her composure finally breaking. And what was I? I shot back, my voice rising. What was I, Sarah? When you closed that door in my face, what was I? Tears welled in her eyes, but they elicited no sympathy from me. They were 12 years too late. I am not your solution, I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. I am not your bank. You made your choice 12 years ago. You chose your new family. So you can go back to them and you can figure it out. Just like I did. I walked to the door and held it open. A clear, unmistakable dismissal. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and anguish. She had come here expecting a check, a quick fix from the wealthy son she had cast aside. She had not expected to confront the man he had become. Alex, please, she sobbed. The doorman will see you out, I said, my gaze as unyielding as the steel and glass that surrounded us. She walked past me, a ghost finally being exorcised, leaving the scent of cheap perfume and desperation in her wake. I closed the door, the solid, expensive thud echoing in the sudden silence. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my eyes squeezed shut. The armor was heavy. For the first time in a long time, I could feel its weight. The ghost was gone, but the haunting had just begun. The silence in the penthouse was different now. Before Sarah's visit, it had been a comfortable silence, the sound of peace and control. Now, it was a hollow, ringing void. The hum of the servers in the basement, once a reassuring thrum of productivity, now sounded like a taunt, a reminder of the machine-like efficiency I had used to wall off my own humanity. I couldn't work. I sat at my desk, the triptych of monitors displaying lines of code and market analytics, but the symbols were meaningless. My mind was stuck on a loop, replaying the look on her face, the initial hope, the shock, the final, crumbling despair. I had wanted to hurt her. I had succeeded. So why did I feel so empty? Why did victory taste like ash in my mouth? My business partner, Maya, found me staring blankly at the screen. Maya was the opposite of me in every way, warm, empathetic, and relentlessly human. She was the one who handled our clients, who could charm a venture capitalist with a single smile. I was the architect, she was the ambassador. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, placing a mug of coffee on my desk. She didn't wait for an answer. The quarterly projections are in. We're up 12%. You should be doing a victory lap, not communing with the dead. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter. A ghost came to visit, I said, my voice low. My mother. Maya's cheerful expression dissolved. She knew the broad strokes of my past, the story of a kid who pulled himself up by non-existent bootstraps. She pulled up a chair. What did she want? Money, I said, the word coming out like a curse. For her other kids. My siblings. She wants me to pay for their college. Wow, Maya breathed. The audacity. What did you say? I told her to get out. Good, she said firmly. You don't owe her a thing, Alex. Not a damn thing. I know, I said. But the conviction wasn't there. My response had been a reflex, a knee-jerk reaction honed by years of resentment. It was the answer the 16-year-old me would have given. But was it the answer the 28-year-old me truly felt? That night, sleep offered no escape. I was back in the kitchen of the Greasy Spoon, a 24-hour diner where I'd gotten my first under-the-table job. I was 16, all sharp angles and simmering rage. The owner, a grizzled man named Mr. Henderson with hands permanently stained by grease and a heart 2 sizes too big, had taken one look at my desperate face and hired me on the spot. I could smell the stale coffee and sizzling bacon of the memory. I remembered scrubbing pots until my knuckles bled, the drone of the late-night radio a constant companion. I remembered Mr. Henderson sliding a plate of unsold pancakes towards me at 3 a.m. Eat up, kid. Can't build an empire on an empty stomach. He was the one who saw the library books I kept under the counter. C++ for Dummies. Introduction to Network Architecture. He never pried, but one day he pointed to the book. That stuff's the future. The diner is the now. Don't ever forget the difference. He was the first person who saw me as someone with a future, not just a past. He was more of a parent to me in those 2 years than Sarah had been for the last 5 of our life together. He had died of a heart attack a year before I sold my first piece of software. I never got to thank him properly. I woke up in a cold sweat, the luxurious fret sheets tangled around me. My sterile, perfect world felt like a cage. A beautiful, expensive cage, but a cage nonetheless. I had run so far and so fast from my past, I had forgotten what it felt like to be human. Driven by an impulse I didn't understand, I got out of bed and went to my computer. This time, I didn't look at code. I typed Liam and Chloe Miller into a search engine. Miller was Mark's last name. It didn't take long. A small town's local news website had an article from a few months ago, high school academic decathlon team heads to state finals. There was a picture. A group of smiling teenagers, holding a trophy. A girl in the front row with bright, intelligent eyes and a familiar, determined set to her jaw was identified as Chloe Miller. She looked nothing like me, but there was something in her expression, a fierce pride, that resonated. Then I found Liam. He had an Instagram account, public and filled with his art. It was surprisingly good. Charcoal sketches of landscapes, moody and atmospheric. Portraits of his friends, his dog, his sister. In one photo, he and Chloe were sitting on a porch swing, laughing. They looked happy. They looked like normal kids, full of dreams and potential. They were not the abstract monsters I had imagined. They were real. And then I saw her. Sarah. In the background of one of Liam's photos, taken at what looked like a school art fair. She was looking at one of his drawings on display, and on her face was a look of such profound, unadulterated pride. It was a look I had craved my entire childhood. A look she had never once given me. The sight didn't ignite the familiar rage. Instead, a different emotion surfaced, something more complex and unsettling. It was a deep, aching sorrow. These kids had gotten the mother I never had. The mother who stayed, who nurtured their talents, who looked at them with pride. Was it fair to punish them for that? To deny them their future because of a past they had no part in creating? A text message lit up my phone screen. It was an unknown number. Alex, it's Sarah. I'm sorry for how I came to you. I was desperate. Please, just think about the kids. They're good kids. They deserve a chance. Don't punish them for my mistakes. Her words, combined with the images of her children, began to erode the foundations of my anger. My anger had been a shield, my fuel. Without it, what was I? I had built my entire identity around being the boy she threw away. The one who succeeded out of spite. If I let go of that spite, who was Alex Kane? I closed the laptop. The city lights outside seemed colder, more distant. I had won the battle at my front door, but I was losing the war inside my own head. I had to know more. I couldn't make a decision based on ghosts and digital pictures. I needed to see the other side of the story, not just the one I had been telling myself for 12 years. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. Meet me for coffee tomorrow. Noon. The Grindhouse Cafe on Elm Street. Bring them. The Grindhouse Cafe was neutral territory. It was a place of worn wooden tables in the rich, comforting smell of roasted coffee beans, a world away from my sterile penthouse and her presumably chaotic home. I chose it because it was public, and because it wasn't mine. I needed to be an observer, not a host. I arrived early, taking a small table in the corner that gave me a clear view of the entrance. My hands were steady as I held the menu, but a low-frequency hum of anxiety vibrated just beneath my skin. They arrived at noon. Sarah entered first, her eyes scanning the room nervously. She looked even more worn out than she had in my apartment, the harsh light of day unforgiving. Behind her were two teenagers. The boy, Liam, was tall and lanky, with a curtain of dark hair that fell over his eyes. He clutched a sketchbook to his chest like a shield. The girl, Chloe, was shorter, with the same bright, intelligent eyes from the news article. She had a confidence about her that her brother lacked, but her posture was rigid with apprehension. They looked like kids being dragged to meet a distant, intimidating relative, which, I supposed, was exactly what I was. Sarah guided them to my table. Alex, she said softly. This is Liam, and this is Chloe. Hi, Chloe said, her voice clear and steady. She stuck out her hand. It's nice to finally meet you. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm. Liam just nodded, pushing his hair out of his eyes to get a quick, furtive look at me before staring down at his sneakers. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the chairs. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. A waitress came and took our orders, a welcome interruption. I ordered a black coffee. Sarah and the kids ordered hot chocolates with whipped cream. It was such a small, normal detail, yet it felt like a dispatch from another universe. So, I began, directing my question to Chloe. Your mother tells me you want to be a doctor. She lit up, the nervousness momentarily forgotten. Yes. A pediatric oncologist, maybe. I've been volunteering at the county hospital on weekends. It's what I'm meant to do. There was a passion in her voice that was undeniable. This wasn't just a career choice, it was a calling. I turned to Liam. And you're an artist. I saw some of your work online. He flinched, as if I'd uncovered a secret. You did? It's good, I said honestly. You have a real eye for light and shadow. A faint blush colored his cheeks. Thanks. I want to go to art school. Maybe study graphic design. Sarah watched this exchange with a tense, desperate hope on her face. She was letting them do the talking, letting them present themselves as worthy investments. But as I observed them, a strange thing happened. I stopped seeing them as her pawns. I saw them as two young people on the cusp of their lives, full of the same terrifying, exhilarating potential I'd had. The difference was, they had a mother who believed in them. My gaze shifted to Sarah. I noticed the frayed cuff of her coat, the cheapness of her handbag. I noticed the way she sipped her hot chocolate, as if it were an expensive luxury. This wasn't the picture of the woman who had upgraded her life at my expense. This was a woman who was struggling. Mark's health, I said, my voice low so the kids couldn't hear. What happened? Sarah's eyes filled with a familiar weariness. It was the plant closure first. He was there for 20 years. His whole pension, gone. He found other work, manual labor, but, a few years ago, he was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease. His back is shot. He can't work much. Most days, he can barely get out of bed. The narrative I had constructed in my head began to crumble. The story of my mother callously trading me in for a better model was wrong. She had traded me in for a different life, yes, but it was a life that had, in its own way, fallen apart. She hadn't ascended to some domestic paradise, she had walked into another kind of trap. Why didn't you ever reach out? I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Before this? Just to see if I was okay? She looked down at her hands, which were twisting a paper napkin into a shredded mess. Shame, she whispered. At first, it was pride. I told myself I'd made the right choice, that you were better off. But as the years went on, it was shame. How could I call you? What would I even say? Hello, son, I threw away, how are you? I saw an article about you online a few years ago. About your company. I was proud. And so ashamed. I figured the best thing I could do for you was to stay away. To not poison your new life with my failures. Her words were not an excuse. They didn't absolve her. But for the first time, they sounded like a reason. A flawed, human, cowardly reason. Chloe and Liam were talking quietly to each other, giving us the illusion of privacy. I saw Chloe put a reassuring hand on her brother's arm. They were a team. They had each other. It was a stark contrast to my own solitary adolescence. I had been an army of one. I looked at these two kids, innocent of their mother's past sins. I looked at their mother, a woman who was not a monster, but a person who had made a monstrous choice out of weakness and fear, and had been living with the consequences ever since. The black and white world I had lived in for 12 years was dissolving into an impossible, murky gray. The anger that had been my compass was gone, replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. Paying for their college was no longer a simple question of yes or no. It was tangled up in a web of guilt, responsibility, and a past that was far more complicated than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I paid the bill, leaving a $50 on the table. I need to think, I said, standing up. Sarah's face fell. She thought this was the final rejection. Chloe looked up at me, her expression unreadable. He's your son, she said quietly, but with an edge of steel. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, undeniable fact. I met her gaze. I know, I said. As I walked out of the cafe and into the cold afternoon air, her words echoed in my mind. He's your son. But I was also their brother. And that was a truth I no longer knew what to do with. The week that followed the coffee shop meeting was a week spent in limbo. My mind, usually a clean, efficient processor of logic and data, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. I drove past the old diner, now a trendy juice bar. I sat on a bench in the park where I had once tried to sleep, only to be chased off by a security guard. These places were no longer just monuments to my own survival, they were now pieces of a larger, more complicated story. Maya found me in the office late one night, not working, just staring at the city. You've been a ghost all week, she said gently. Talk to me. I told her everything. About the kids, their dreams. About Sarah's story, the sick husband, the shame. So, she's not a monster, she's just pathetic, Maya summarized, not unkindly. It doesn't change what she did, Alex. I know, I said, rubbing my temples. But it changes the why. I always thought she did it for a better life. It turns out, she just traded one struggle for another. And these kids, they're good kids, Maya. They're caught in the middle of it. So what are you going to do? Write a check and become their rich, benevolent ghost brother? That's what I don't know, I admitted. Giving them money feels too easy. It's a transaction. It lets her off the hook. It lets me off the hook. It doesn't fix anything. It just papers over the cracks. Maybe some things can't be fixed, Maya said. Maybe you just have to decide what you can live with. Her words stuck with me. What could I live with? I couldn't live with the simmering hatred anymore, it was exhausting. But I couldn't live with pretending the past didn't happen. I needed something else. I needed closure. Not the kind you get from a bank transfer, but the kind you get from a final, painful reckoning. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Come to my house," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Tonight. 8 o'clock. Come alone." I heard her sharp intake of breath before she whispered, "Okay." At precisely 8 p.m., the doorman buzzed. I didn't have her come up to the penthouse. Instead, I went down to the ground floor and met her in the lobby. "We're not going up," I said. "Follow me." I led her not to the street, but through a side door that opened onto a small, private terrace attached to my building. It was my version of a porch. It was minimalist and cold, with a single metal bench and a few starkly pruned plants. A light drizzle had begun to fall, misting the air and slicking the stone tiles underfoot. The parallel was not lost on me. It was a rainy night on a porch. Again. She stood there, hugging herself against the chill, looking small and fragile against the immense backdrop of the city. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood before her, the roles finally, completely reversed. 12 years ago, I began, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of every one of those years. It was raining then, too. "Do you remember what you told me?" She flinched, tears already welling in her eyes. "Alex, No," I cut her off, holding up a hand. "This time, you listen. I need you to understand what you did. Not the sanitized version you tell yourself to sleep at night. The real one." I made her look at me as I told her everything. About sleeping in bus stations, the bone-deep cold that never seemed to leave. About the gnawing hunger and the humiliation of digging through trash for a meal. About the constant, grinding fear of being a 16-year-old boy alone in the world. I told her about Mr. Henderson, the kindness of a stranger who showed me more compassion than my own mother had. "I didn't just figure it out, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "A part of me died on that porch. The part that trusted people. The part that believed in family. You didn't just throw me out. You hollowed me out. I built all of this," I gestured vaguely at the gleaming skyscraper above us, "to fill the hole that you left." The dam of her composure finally broke. A raw, guttural sob escaped her, and she crumpled. Her knees didn't quite hit the ground, but she bent over, her body racked with tremors. "I'm sorry," she wept, the words torn from her. "Oh, God, Alex, I am so sorry. I was a coward. I was weak. I was so terrified of failing again, and Mark, he felt like a life raft. You were a reminder of everything that went wrong before him. You were so smart and so independent," I told myself a lie. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, because I wasn't strong enough to handle you and a new baby and a new life. It was selfish. It was monstrous. There hasn't been a day, not one single day, that I haven't thought about you and what I did. This was it. This was what I had needed to hear for 12 years. Not excuses about Mark's health or the factory. Just the ugly, unvarnished truth of her own failure. It wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. It was about this. This moment of pure, painful acknowledgement. The rain fell a little harder. The rage that had been my constant companion for so long was gone, washed away by the downpour and her tears. In its place was a vast, quiet sadness. I looked at the sobbing woman before me, not as my mother, not as a monster, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made a catastrophic mistake and had been paying for it ever since. The change happened then, right there on the cold stone of my porch. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was release. I was letting go of the hate, not for her, but for me. I was tired of carrying it. I reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that shocked us both. Her sobbing quieted into shuddering breaths. "Go home, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle for the first time. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and rain and mascara. "The kids." "I will think about the kids," I said. "But this was for me. We needed to have this conversation." I turned and walked back to the door, leaving her on the porch in the rain. I closed the door behind me, the sound soft in the quiet lobby. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt light. The 12-year-old ghost that had been chained to my ankle had finally let go. The days after the confrontation on the porch were the quietest I had known in my adult life. The hum of the servers was just a hum again. The silence in my apartment was once again peaceful. The rage, which had been the engine of my ambition for so long, had been decommissioned. I found I could code with a clearer head, make business decisions with a sharper focus. The armor I had worn for 12 years had been set down, and I was surprised to find I could stand just fine without it. I knew I had to make a decision about Liam and Chloe. Simply writing a check still felt wrong. It was the solution of the old Alex Kane, a detached, transactional fix to a human problem. The new Alex, the one who had felt the weight of his mother's sorrow on his porch, needed a different approach. This wasn't about bailing Sarah out. This was about giving two innocent kids a chance they deserved, a chance that I had to fight tooth and nail for. But it had to be on my terms. I didn't call Sarah. Instead, I called my lawyer. A week later, I asked Sarah to meet me again, this time with Liam and Chloe. We met in a private room at a quiet restaurant. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. Sarah looked nervous, while Liam and Chloe just looked resigned, as if expecting the final blow. I let them settle before I slid a thick envelope across the table. "This is for you," I said, looking directly at Liam and Chloe. Sarah reached for it, but I shook my head gently. "It's for them." Chloe opened it. Inside was not a check, but a legal document. Her eyes, so quick and intelligent, scanned the first page. Her jaw dropped. "This is a trust," she whispered, looking up at me in disbelief. "It's an educational trust fund," I explained calmly. "It contains enough to cover the full tuition, room, and board for both of your undergraduate degrees at the universities of your choice. But there are conditions." I laid them out clearly. The money can only be used for education-related expenses, dispersed directly to the schools. You both must maintain a minimum GPA of 3.5. And the most important condition, you have to send me a report at the end of every semester. Not just your grades, but a letter. I want to know what classes you're taking, what you're learning, what your plans are. This is not a gift, it's an investment. I'm investing in you. I expect a return." Liam stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Chloe was rereading the document, tears shining in her eyes. "Why?" Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at him, then at his sister. "Because my success was built on a foundation of anger and spite. I don't want that for you. I want your success to be built on opportunity. On your talent. Your mother and I have a past that is complicated and painful. But that is our burden, not yours. Your future should not be a casualty of it." Finally, I turned to Sarah. She was crying silently, her hands covering her mouth. There was no triumph in her expression, only a profound, humbled gratitude. "As for us," I said to her, my voice soft but firm, "I don't know what our relationship is. I can't erase what happened, and I don't think I can ever forget it. Forgiveness is a strong word, and I'm not there yet. Maybe I never will be. But I am willing to stop hating you. I'm willing to lay down the weapons. For my sake, and for theirs." It wasn't a Hollywood ending. There were no hugs, no joyful family reunion. It was something more real, more fragile. It was the beginning of a new foundation, one laid not on the rubble of the past, but on the cleared ground of the present. Months passed. My life found a new, steadier rhythm. One evening, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was, "First Semester Update, Chloe Miller." Inside was a PDF of her grades, all A's. Below it was a letter. She wrote about her challenging biochemistry class, a professor who inspired her, and how she'd aced her midterm on cellular mitosis. She told me about the friends she'd made in her dorm and a funny story about a mishap in the chemistry lab. At the end, she wrote, Thank you, Alex. Not just for the money, but for this. For believing in us. I hope I'm making you proud. A few days later, another email arrived. From Liam. His grades were excellent, too. Attached were several digital files of his latest projects, a stunning series of portraits that were a leap forward in skill and emotional depth. His letter was shorter, shyer. Art school is amazing. I finally feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. I've started a series inspired by light and shadow, and how things can look different depending on your perspective. Thank you. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights twinkling outside my window. For the first time, they didn't look like a constellation I had conquered. They just looked like lights. Like home. A genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. I opened a new message and began to type a reply to my sister, starting a conversation that was 12 years overdue. The porch was in the past. What I was building now was a bridge.